As the story unfolds, 20 desperate contestants find themselves abducted and confined in a sprawling underground complex, each room twisted to resemble innocent playgrounds from their childhood. Deceived by promises of unimaginable wealth, they quickly realize the games are far from innocent. They're a brutal gauntlet of survival where losing means death, and winning only buys another chance at life. The first game begins innocuously enough: red light, green light. But the catch? Anyone who moves even an inch on red light is immediately eliminated by hidden marksmen. Panic ensues as players see the horrific reality of their situation. Trust becomes a rare currency as the survivors, both horrified and fueled by desperation, realize that every alliance comes with a knife ready to turn on them. Each game is designed to exploit their fears and weaknesses: a blood-stained tug-of-war, a twisted hopscotch with glass panels over a deadly drop, a nightmarish version of dodgeball where failure means torture. The players are haunted by memories of friends they've watched die, and the choices they've made to stay alive gnaw at their sanity. As they progress, the games become more sadistic and tailored to their specific phobias and traumas, forcing each to confront their darkest fears. The organizers reveal nothing about themselves, and faceless guards enforce the rules with brutal efficiency. Meanwhile, some players begin to suspect there's more to this contest than a mere cash prize. Rumors of an even darker purpose spread among the players, yet no one knows who to trust. Contestants are pitted against one another, manipulated into turning on each other as the prize draws nearer. And with each round, the tension mounts. The contestants are pushed beyond their limits. There's no rest, no escape, only the relentless grind of survival, with each contestant growing more paranoid, scarred, and desensitized to game promises a fresh wave of terror, and in the end, the rules seem bent only on prolonging their suffering rather than rewarding them with victory. Driven to the brink of insanity, the survivors cling to the hope that there's a way out, yet the story keeps them trapped in an endless cycle of violence, as every escape attempt is thwarted by an invisible force that watches, waiting. The game is never meant to end. Only the truly broken will survive, if they can even call it that. And so, the Squid Game story continues, an unending horror of human desperation, greed, and the monstrous lengths people will go to for a glimmer of hope in an unforgiving world, as the survivors trudge onward. They enter the next arena, a room filled with metal walls that echo every movement, amplifying the slightest sound to an unbearable level. The new game, Simon says, is simple enough: follow the commands or face consequences. But the twist? Each failure triggers a random, brutal punishment. Some are minor, like electric shocks, but others? Those push players to the very edge of human endurance. Limbs are crushed in mechanical traps, others are scalded, shocked, or mutilated as they fail to obey Simon. Their screams blend with the hum of machinery, heightening the horrific atmosphere, and the walls seem to close in, turning the room into an echoing hell. The few remaining players begin to form alliances. But trust is fragile, a commodity broken by desperation. Players turn on one another, whispering suspicions that each game is rigged, that certain players are sabotaging others. During the night, hidden blades and poison rations start appearing, and they realize the organizers have introduced a new rule: contestants can earn bonuses by eliminating each other outside of the games. Suspicion festers, paranoia seizes everyone, and what should be a brief reprieve between games becomes a bloodbath. One night, the players are awoken by the next game has begun. They're herded into a room filled with mirrors and told to find the exit before the room seals and fills with a deadly gas. But each mirror reflects a distorted, grotesque version of the viewer, taunting them with their worst fears and insecurities, laughing at them, showing loved ones they failed, and horrific images of their past mistakes. With time slipping away, players are forced to shatter the mirrors, cutting themselves on the glass, only to find endless reflections mocking their suffering. As they finally break through to the next room, they're faced with the worst challenge yet: an escape maze where each wrong turn triggers hidden torture devices. Racks, iron maidens, and spike pits await them at every dead end, turning the maze into a gauntlet of horror. Blood-soaked and wounded, they claw their way through the darkness, hearing the moans and screams of those who didn't make it, the disembodied voices echoing around them. Only a handful reach the exit, and as they collapse on the ground, gasping for breath, they realize they've been herded back into the same starting room. They have to do it all again. Days, weeks, time loses meaning as they cycle through the games, each round more brutal than the last, each reward nothing more than temporary relief from the pain. The players realize there's no end, no escape. This is their new reality, a relentless loop of agony, suspense, and betrayal, with the flicker of hope forever dangled just out of reach. As they sink into despair, Whispers circulate that perhaps one of them is working for the organizers, someone who is manipulating the game from the inside. Tensions explode as accusations fly, leading to deadly confrontations, and the remaining players become more brutal, more unhinged, willing to do anything, trust anyone, even their worst enemies, if it means another. No matter how much blood they spill, no matter how much pain they endure, they are trapped in an endless nightmare. The games continue, each designed to shred them down to nothing, to break their minds and bodies, feeding a merciless audience they cannot see. The players stumble into yet another arena, their bodies battered, their minds fractured. This new game, The Puppeteer, presents them with life-sized mannequins suspended by chains, each one resembling one of the remaining contestants. A voice from above informs them that each mannequin is rigged with pressure-sensitive explosives, and they must each control their mannequin through a series of childlike motions, jumping, dancing, crawling. But any mistake, any failure to move in perfect sync, triggers a gruesome detonation. In twisted irony, they must each watch a figure identical to themselves suffer unimaginable destruction for their missteps. As the game drags on, blood splatters the walls. Some contestants crack, unable to bear the sight of their likenesses mutilated over and over again. But others cling to survival, forcing themselves to carry on, only to find that as soon as the game is completed, the mannequins come to life, dragging their barely living counterparts into another room. In their exhausted state, the players barely process this until they hear screams echoing from the darkness. A new game is already beginning. Though they've hardly finished the last, this next game, The Choice, places the remaining players in a circular room where they're each shackled to a heavy metal door. Across from each door is a fellow contestant, their fate hanging by a single lever. The objective? Each player must choose whether to release their opponent or lock their door permanently, sacrificing them to the torturous devices awaiting on the other side. But if neither of them pulls the lever within a countdown, both players are released into a pit of rusted smoke, which waits hungrily to consume them. Time ticks by as each pair stares each other down, their eyes filled with desperation and the remnants of humanity clinging to their thoughts. But with each tick, desperation overpowers mercy, and the room fills with the sounds of clanging levers and agonized screams as the doors slam shut. Those who pull the lever and survive are left to wrestle with their guilt, haunted by the faces of those they've condemned. Days stretch into a horror as the games become a relentless march through nightmares. The food they're provided grows scarcer and more rotten, and the players realize they're being forced to compete not only against each other but against starvation and thirst. Whispers rise in the shadows, stories of players who began to turn on each other between games, hunting down the weakest for scraps of food and water. The guards turn a blind eye, seemingly entertained by this descent into primal savagery. The next game, Blood's Worth, is a twisted test of endurance. Each player is shackled by their ankles and wrists, suspended above a vat of acid. They are handed a small, sharpened blade and told they must give up a certain amount of blood to be released. The amount is more than most of them can safely endure, and the room fills with the sound of sobs and desperate gasps as players cut into their own flesh, filling the tubes that hang from their wrists. Watching in horror as the acid eats away at anything that drips below, some players pass out from the blood loss and are immediately dropped into the acid below, their screams quickly silenced in a horrifying hiss. The survivors, now weak and pale, barely able to stand, are released from their shackles, only to stumble directly into yet another game, and so it goes, a perpetual nightmare that drags them through increasingly sadistic trials, games that force them to choose between torture, betrayal, and their very human. Each new room reveals horrors more twisted than the last, stripping them of any semblance of hope. Each surviving contestant begins to look less like a person and more like a shell, eyes hollow and skin scarred. They have become prisoners of a game that was never meant to end, a cycle of blood and pain from which there is no escape. The survivors, now little more than walking corpses, stumble into what seems like a vast, pitch-black labyrinth. Their only source of light is a dim, flickering lantern in each of their hands, casting long shadows that seem to twist and shift around them. The voice on the loudspeaker calls this game The Dark Descent. The rules are simple: make it to the exit before the lanterns go out. But with each minute, the lanterns grow dimmer, and a creeping, mechanical hum starts echoing through the walls, suggesting something large and lethal is moving closer. As they navigate the endless corridors, spikes emerge from the walls at random, piercing the unfortunate players who can't react fast enough. Jagged edges carve into their flesh as they stumble forward, each scream of pain swallowed by the darkness. Some become trapped in dead ends, where the walls begin to close in with agonizing slowness, leaving them nowhere to run. The others hear their desperate cries for help but know there's nothing they can do. Hours of brutal stumbling and maddening dead ends, the survivors reach the next stage, only to face a new horror. The game is called the Chain of Trust, and each player is bound by a thick metal chain around their neck, linked to another contestant. Across the room lies a set of levers, each tied to a timer. Every minute, a lever must be pulled, or the chains will start to tighten. However, only one contestant can survive each pull, and those who fail to reach the lever in time are doomed to suffocate. In the chaos, contestants begin to turn on each other, fighting over the few levers available, clawing, scratching, and even biting, doing whatever it takes to be the last one standing. When the ordeal is over, the survivors are covered in blood, some theirs, some not. They are forced into another room, their bodies battered and shaking. This time, they are met with the pain carousel. Each player is strapped to a rotating wheel, which is lined with sharpened spikes, razors, and acid-coated hooks. As the wheel begins to turn, they're forced to keep their limbs suspended to avoid mutilation. Any slip or miscalculation means their flesh is torn away, and the pain becomes so excruciating that some players start to scream until their voices give out. Round after round, they endure this nightmare, trapped on the carousel of pain, watching as those who can't keep up are ground into the spikes. Their bodies left broken and unrecognizable. Those who survive this gruesome challenge are barely human anymore. Their limbs are scarred and twisted, their minds shattered by the relentless horror. They are herded into what is called the final test, though they have learned there is no true end. In this new room, they face one another, each player given a loaded weapon with only a single bullet. They're told that the first to fire wins freedom, while the others will be condemned to yet another round of endless torment. For a moment, the players' their faces twisted with desperation and horror as they realize the cruelty of the organizers' design. Survival will come at the ultimate price. Then, in a flurry of screams and gunfire, the room descends into chaos as contestants turn on each other, driven mad by the endless cycle of torture and betrayal. In the end, the lone survivor stumbles out of the room, covered in blood and barely breathing, only to find himself back at the very beginning. The organizer's voice crackles over the loudspeaker, welcoming him to a new round with a sickeningly cheerful tone. The survivor's eyes widen in horror as he realizes he has been plunged back into an endless hell, where escape is an illusion and survival only brings more suffering. He collapses to his knees, his mind broken, but the guards force him to stand, dragging him back to play the games yet again. Dragged back into the starting room, the lone survivor's haunted eyes dart around. He's surrounded by a fresh set of contestants, new faces with the same look of desperation and terror that he himself had once worn. The organizers have brought in new victims, each lured by the promise of the same twisted prize, entirely unaware of the endless cycle they've just entered. For the survivor, however, the horror has only begun anew. The next game, the glass web, begins with a sickening shift. They're herded into a room where glass platforms crisscross over a seemingly bottomless pit. Each platform looks sturdy, but some will shatter under the slightest pressure. With each step, the tension builds, as players attempt to navigate a safe path across. But inevitably, someone missteps, plummeting into darkness with a blood-curdling scream, the sound reverberating up from the abyss. Others watch in horror as they're left behind on thin platforms, knowing they must step forward or face the same fate. The survivor, well acquainted with the cruelty of these games, becomes a beacon of fear. He moves, using the new contestants as pawns, subtly pushing them toward risky platforms. The others start to notice, suspicion flickering in their eyes. But it doesn't matter, the horror of the game overshadows everything. Betrayal becomes necessary, alliances crumble, and, one by one, players slip and fall, their bodies left to dangle in the darkness, shattered glass marking their deadly descent. When only a few survive the glass web, the next horror awaits them, the pit of blades. It's a macabre game of chance. Each player must reach into a pit filled with razors, knives, and jagged metal shards to retrieve a key that will unlock the door to freedom. But the catch? There are only enough keys for half of them. As they plunge their hands in, skin and flesh shred against the sharp metal, leaving trails of blood and agonized screams. Some contestants hesitate, allowing others to claim the keys first, but their hesitation is deadly. The door slams shut, and those left keyless are forced to watch as the walls close in, pressing them into the pit of blades, sealing their fate in a horrifying crush of flesh and steel. The survivors stumble out, hands dripping with blood, bodies slashed and bruised, only to be met with another game, this one deceptively simple. It's called Trust the Blade. Each player must choose a partner, and together they face a row of swinging axes. The rules are sinisterly straightforward, both must reach the end to survive. But if either one falls, the survivor must carry on alone, facing an even deadlier gauntlet. Suspicion fills the air, with each partner questioning the loyalty of the other. Some attempt to go solo, only to be struck down by the swinging blades in a blood-soaked frenzy. In one horrific moment, a contestant pushes his partner into the path of an oncoming axe, sacrificing them to ensure his own survival. The others gasp, but before they can react, they're forced to dodge, ducking beneath the relentless swing. By the time they reach the end, only a few blood-streaked figures remain, and their horror-filled eyes are empty, devoid of humanity. With barely time to catch their breath, they're pushed into yet another room, a sanctuary, or so they think. But this sanctuary is merely a twisted setup for the next game. It's filled with pools of red water, tinted by blood from past games. They're told they must find a hidden artifact within the pools, and the fastest will be given a short reprieve. However, the pools are lined with barbed wires just beneath the surface, invisible until it's too late. As they wade in, slicing themselves on the hidden barbs, screams echo around the room. The water turns darker as blood mingles with it, the pain reaching unbearable heights. One contestant slips, tangling themselves in the barbs, unable to free themselves as the water fills their mouth, drowning them in a mixture of blood and pain. Others manage to escape, crawling out of the pool with their flesh torn, only to be told that the sanctuary was a lie. The reprieve they were promised doesn't exist. Now reduced to a handful of mangled, barely living figures, they are herded into the arena of masks, where they're forced to wear masks designed to restrict their vision and muffle their hearing. A voice echoes through the room, explaining that they must hunt each other down, relying solely on their other senses. The last one standing will earn a bonus that could spare them a future round of torture. The arena becomes a brutal, primal battle as they blindly stumble through the dark, attacking anything that moves. Paranoia turns them into beasts, their humanity erased in their drive to survive. Each hit, each stab is met with muffled screams, their masks wet with blood and sweat as they descend further into madness. By the end, only one remains, crouched over the bodies of the others, gasping, his blood-soaked mask staring into the lone survivor, battered and trembling, collapses back in the starting room, where fresh contestants stand in horrified silence. He barely has time to breathe before he's forced into the next game, a sickening, nightmarish test called the Mirror Maze. The rules? Players must navigate an enormous labyrinth of mirrors, but the catch is that certain mirrors are rigged. If a player stands before a death mirror for more than 5 seconds, sharp blades snap out from behind the glass, turning it into a wall of deadly razors. The player's reflections twist and warp, mocking their fear, as if the mirrors themselves are hungry for flesh. As the contestants inch forward, each step becomes an agonizing decision. Paranoia drives them to question every reflection, every shadow, every movement. Occasionally, a scream shatters the silence as someone hesitates too long, only to be impaled by the hidden blades. The survivor watches the horror unfold, his mind already cracking under the weight of endless brutality, yet somehow numb to the chaos around him. He knows better than to trust anything in this place, but then, he encounters another trap. The maze's walls begin to close, forcing players to move faster, pushing them into even more traps. One contestant slips, stumbling into a series of death mirrors. Within seconds, they're shredded beyond recognition, their blood smearing across the mirrored walls, marking a path of carnage. The others desperately try to avoid the same fate, but as the mirrors shift and the walls close in tighter, the chances of survival dwindle, barely escaping. A few blood-soaked survivors are thrown into the next game, the Feast of Needles. It's a grotesque banquet where the players are presented with plates of food. They're told to eat what's in front of them to gain strength for the final rounds. But there's a twist, each piece of food contains hidden needles, shards of glass, or razors. Organizers cruelly watch as hunger and desperation force the players to swallow these nightmarish meals, tearing their throats and stomachs apart. Blood seeps from their mouths as they choke down each bite, their screams stifled by the need to survive. Only a handful emerge from the Feast of Needles, each covered in blood from the inside out. But there's no mercy for them. The next room is worse, a chamber known as the Iron Teeth. Players are strapped into chairs with metal jaws clamped around their limbs. They're forced to answer a series of questions, and for every wrong answer, the iron jaws tighten, threatening to crush their bones. The questions are cruel, each one a riddle designed to manipulate and confuse. pushing the players to the breaking point. The survivor, barely clinging to sanity, feels the teeth tightening around his leg as he struggles to think. His body shudders with the knowledge that one wrong answer could end him. In a final moment of desperate cunning, he answers correctly, escaping the iron teeth only to find himself in the next nightmare. He's led into a room called the Chamber of Reversal. Here, each remaining contestant is chained to the ceiling, hanging upside down over a floor lined with spikes. Blood rushes to their heads as they're suspended, forced to hold themselves up to avoid impalement. Time crawls by in agonizing minutes, and soon, one by one, their strength fails. The weak collapse, falling headfirst into the spikes, their blood pooling in horrific fountains. The survivor, now little more than a shell of the person he once was, somehow endures, his mind fractured, his soul hollowed out by the unending. As the survivor is dragged back to the starting point, the organizers reveal the next twisted challenge, the Room of Shadows. The new contestants, wide-eyed and trembling, whisper questions to each other, but the survivor knows better. This room is far worse than anything they've yet endured. In the Room of Shadows, each contestant is given a small candle and told to make their way through a pitch-black maze. However, hidden in the darkness are shadows, phantom-like figures who stalk and strike. The shadows are merciless and equipped with weapons meant to disorient, wound, and terrify. The only hope for survival is to keep the candle lit, as any hint of light keeps the shadows at bay. But the drafty corridors make the flames flicker, adding tension as each step could plunge them into darkness. As they venture into the maze, the shadows begin to close in, their heavy breaths and metallic whispers echoing off the walls. One contestant stumbles, their candle extinguishing in an instant. Before they can relight it, a shadowy figure lunges, tearing into them with a glinting blade. Their screams ripple through the maze, haunting the other players as they frantically cup their candles to protect the flames. The survivor presses on, heart racing, sweat pouring down his face, even as he hears the other contestants fall one by one. He understands that he can't stop. Hesitation means death. But the shadows seem to have learned his movements, lying in wait at the narrow turns, forcing him to choose between risking an encounter or turning back. His candle flickers dangerously low, and he can feel a shadow just behind him, watching, waiting for the flame to die. Finally, he reaches the end, bloodied and gasping, only to be thrust into yet another ordeal, the carousel of pain. Here, the remaining few contestants are shackled to a rotating platform that spins at increasingly nauseating speeds. Spikes and blades surround them, inching closer with each. They're told to push against the shackles to keep the carousel from spinning out of control. If they fail to press with enough force, the carousel will whip around violently, slamming them into the spikes. The survivor grits his teeth, muscles burning as he struggles against the rotation. But as exhaustion sets in, contestants weaken, and the carousel begins spinning wildly. The screams of those unable to hold on fill the room as they're thrown against the spikes, their bodies mangled in a bloody, relentless blur. The survivor watches in horror, but he forces himself to push harder, his last reserves of strength barely keeping him away from the spike's deadly embrace. Only 3 contestants remain, including the survivor, when they're forced into the next nightmare, the corridor of nails. This narrow passage is lined with nails of varying lengths jutting out of the walls and floor. The players are instructed to crawl through without touching the nails. However, they soon realize that the floor is rigged to shift under their weight, making it almost impossible to avoid the sharp, rusted points. Blood and sweat mix as they inch forward, each movement sending nails scraping against their flesh. The first contestant lets out a piercing scream as a nail drives into their arm, impaling them to the floor. Unable to continue, they writhe in agony as the corridor fills with the smell of blood and rust. The survivor pushes forward, ignoring the searing pain as nails dig into his legs and arms, carving trails of blood. By the time he reaches the end, his vision is blurry, his body a mosaic of cuts and bruises. He can barely stand as he's led into the next room, the cage of choices. Here, he's presented with 3 cages, each containing a tool of torture, a pair of iron pincers, a small serrated knife, and a branding iron. A voice explains that he must choose one tool to use on himself, proving his willingness to endure pain first. Then will he be allowed to continue. Numb with dread, he picks the iron pincers and forces himself to extract one of his own nails, the blinding pain nearly causing him to pass out. But he refuses to let go, his resolve hardened by the endless cycle of death and betrayal. As blood drips down his hand, he's given a key to the next level, leaving behind the others who can't bring themselves to complete the horrific task. The survivor stumbles into the next chamber, the chamber of betrayal. He's joined by the remaining player, a young woman who's barely able to stand. The rules are simple, only one of them can advance. They're given a weapon and told that the last one standing will be allowed a short reprieve. For a moment, they lock eyes, silently acknowledging the twisted game's brutality. But desperation consumes them, and the survivor finds himself lunging forward, every ounce of rage and terror fueling his attack. The room echoes with screams and the sounds of their struggle, both driven to a feral state. Finally, bloodied and victorious, he stands alone, gasping for breath, hands shaking as the weight of what he's done sinks in, but as he turns, he realizes he's once again in the starting room, confronted by a new group of contestants who stare at him with a mix of horror and awe. The game has reset, and he's forced to endure the cycle anew, each round stripping away more of his humanity, trapping him in an endless nightmare where survival is after countless cycles through the brutal games, the survivor, a man who can scarcely remember his own name, stumbles into yet another horrific room. This time, he finds himself alone, the silence more oppressive than any scream he's endured. The walls are plain, with a single chair in the center. An unsettling calm fills the space, broken only by the sound of his ragged breaths. A voice crackles over an unseen speaker. "Congratulations! You are the final contestant." The announcement sends a shockwave through him. He's endured endless rounds of death, suffering, and betrayal, each round seemingly designed to strip away his humanity. And now, it might actually be over. A door opens, revealing a small, darkened theater room with a massive screen at the front. The room is empty save for the single chair facing the screen, and as he steps forward, the door slams shut behind him. He has no choice but to sit and watch. The screen lights up, flickering with footage of the games, each scene replaying the tortures, the betrayals, and the endless deaths he's witnessed. Every harrowing scream, every blood-curdling moment, every horrific detail is laid bare, and then, he realizes, it isn't just a replay of past games. It's live footage of every soul he's fought alongside or against, still trapped within the endless loop. Some repeat his own path, struggling through each agonizing trial. Others are fresh contestants, screaming for mercy as they meet the same grisly fates he did. The camera lingers on their faces, their broken expressions, their pleading eyes. Each one of them is suffering just as he had, locked in the same merciless cycle. Then, he sees something that shatters him completely. Among the faces is one he recognizes, a young girl, his own daughter, who must have followed his path to find him. Her terrified eyes meet his through the screen, and he realizes that he's not the final player after all. As his heart twists in despair, the screen flashes a single word, choice. A voice speaks from the darkness, cold and impassive. "If you wish to end the games, you may press the button beneath your chair." However, this choice comes with a price. Ending the game means ending your life, and everyone will be freed. Choose otherwise, and you will remain here, the champion, while your daughter takes your place in the trials. There is no third option. His mind races, fragments of memories flooding back to him, the daughter he'd left behind, his reason for joining the game in the first place. He had endured unimaginable pain and had lost himself to survival instinct, but now, finally, he has a purpose, a way to end the nightmare. Once and for all, with trembling hands, he reaches under the chair and feels the cold metal of the button. He closes his eyes, picturing his daughter's face, vowing that this will be the last scream this place ever hears. He presses the button, the room goes dark, and for the first time in an eternity, silence falls. The screen goes black, and a small smile crosses his face as he feels the walls closing in, his final sacrifice ensuring freedom for his daughter and countless others. As the darkness consumes him, he feels a strange sense of peace. The cycle is broken, the torture ended. His story, and the Squid Game, is over.